This week on BSD Now, we cover AsiaBSDcon, which we just returned from. We have Meltdown and Spectre Patches in FreeBSD stable. We have an interview with MidnightBSD founder. We also have a new story about 8 months with TrueOS. And we cover the mysteries of GNU and BSD split in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 237, AsiaBSDcon 2018. Recorded on the 14th of March 2018, right after AsiaBSDcon, and I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Yes, both Alan and I are back, a little bit jet-lagged still, but it was well worth it. So our headlines this week start, of course, with AsiaBSDcon 2018.
Yeah, so the conference is over now. You've missed it. That's too bad for you. But we will recap a little bit. As I mentioned, we both just got home on Monday night, and it is currently Wednesday, afternoon here. So please excuse our jet lag. We're both slightly trashed, but
readjusting.
Yeah. So the conference, as usual, consisted of 2 days of meetings, followed by the 2 days of paper presentations. Both Benedikt and I arrived a number of days early. I think I got there Friday night, and you got there Saturday afternoon.
Yep, picked me up at the airport, which was very nice. So he helped me back to the hotel in my sleep-deprived state.
Yeah. We decided it made sense to, A, get there in time to get adjusted to the time zone before the conference started, which worked out to be kind of key. Also to take as many tasty meals as possible. So that was nice.
While we're at it, yeah. And we did some touristing to the shrine, one of the shrines, and Ueno Park, one of the days.
Yeah, and we did the zoo and a bunch of other things like that. Hmm? Yes, walked a lot. I think I averaged 25,000 steps per day for the tourist days.
Yeah, that's certainly excellent. Normally we are just sitting down in the office and not doing much walking, but when we get the chance, we walk.
Yeah. So very quickly those days passed, and suddenly it was time for the meetings to start.
Right, we're here for a conference. Yeah, originally that was the plan. And yeah, we made good use of the time for the conference. I mean, the tourist days are kind of long, and the conference days are suddenly quickly over.
Well, part of that is the tourist days, you're adjusting to the jet lag, and so you just want to go to bed all day. And you're walking and walking and walking and slow walking and so on. But yes, the main days of the conference just flew by. I was like, what? It's 3 o'clock already. Oh, the conference is over. What?
What just happened? Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. But the first day, the meeting I went to was the FreeBSD Developer Summit. Well, Benedikt was off teaching his 2 tutorials, which were back-to-back. So on the first day, you could take Benedikt's Managing BSD Systems with Ansible tutorial, or there was the FreeBSD Developer Summit. And then in the afternoon, there was a PF and networking tutorial with Peter Hanstein and Max Stucci. And in room B, there was Benedikt's Introduction to OpenZFS. How did those go?
Yep. So, not bad. I was expecting a little bit more, because the year before for the Ansible talk, there was a lot of people in attendance. I added some new stuff to the Ansible stuff, although only 5 people took that, but those 5 were super engaged. They were very interested in what it can do, and one of them especially asked me during the conference later, oh, look, I already implemented some of the stuff that you showed us, but it doesn't work this way, and I gave some tips, and he got further and further, so I think that really helped him. And for ZFS, I had 7 people in that one, which was good, because it gave me a chance to try out my material. Some of you know that I will give a ZFS tutorial, a 2-day tutorial later in May, at the beginning of May at the Linux Hotel here in Essen in Germany. that needs a bit more preparation. So it was good to prepare some of the slides and show them to an audience already so that they can give me feedback. And some of the people had already used a little bit of ZFS in a FreeNAS, but wanted to know, how to set up a mirrored pool or specifics of ZFS dataset creation or what you can. So some of the things are quite easy, and I showed a lot of stuff on the console, of course, on live systems rather than just on slides, because on slides everything works all the time. But if you do it in a live system, there are interesting side effects sometimes. So that was nice. And I went a little bit longer than the allocated 3 hours for the ZFS one, but there was nothing after the session, so that was okay. And overall, I'm happy with the results, and I will probably rewrite the Ansible tutorial for the BSD CAN session, because in the meantime I learned even more stuff. So I will probably rewrite the whole slides and give the BSD CAN attendees something that they will certainly like, hopefully.
Yeah, and I guess your OpenZFS class in Essence is going to be about the same size, so it really give you a feel for what that was going to be like.
Yep. Yeah, overall it was good.
Yep. Over in the FreeBSD Developer Summit, we discussed the FreeBSD release cycle and how to improve that. Some suggestions for changing some naming to make it fit more with what people expect from coming from other operating systems and so on, and just trying to be more in line with what other people call the things. Probably not calling the point releases so much as actually just updates or something to that effect, so that they get treated more like how they're actually meant to be used. But also possibly doing something kind of like Ubuntu does with the date in the version number, just so that people realize how old the version they have is, because that provides a bit of a push to upgrade. It's like stop running FreeBSD from 2014 and get on 2018. Then we had talks about the Casper helper service for Capsicum, and a new syscall, fd unlink at, or unlink fd at, and some discussion about the pros and cons of that and whether it should be implemented as an at or as a normal one. And then developments in SDIO, which will eventually enable Wi-Fi and SD card readers on more embedded devices on FreeBSD, and treat all of those as CAM devices so that all storage on FreeBSD will be managed the same way.
Excellent. That sounds promising.
Mm-hmm. During the second day of tutorials and meetings, there was an IPv6 security tutorial by Max, a NetMap framework tutorial by Vincenzo Maffinio and another student, Mikhail Honda. The second day of FreeBSD Developer Summit, although I didn't attend that. And then there was BeehiveCon, which was over at the Internet Initiative of Japan building. And there was a NetBSD Summit, and then a NetBSD Birds of a Feather session for kind of a user group meeting. At BeehiveCon, which I think both Benedict and I were at. They had many presentations.
A full day BSD BeehiveCon. So earlier years they had that in the evening, where most people are already a bit tired, so they only could do like 3 hours. But this year we had a full day just for Beehive and other hypervisors, which was good because we had a lot of reports from various BSD projects, not just FreeBSD and Beehive, but also OpenBSD's VMM or VMD, which were quite interesting because they can do live migration. Not live migration, but shutting down, migrating and then started on the new host, which was exciting to see.
Yeah, so Sam Guider from Joyent gave a talk on Beehive Zones for SmartOS, which is porting Beehive to Illumos. Sean Chittenden gave us a quick overview of FreeBSD VPC, which is virtual private cloud stuff, which is mostly just a teaser to his bigger presentation at the AsiaBSDcon proper. Mike Larkin gave us an update on what's happened in OpenBSD's VMM in the last year since his last presentation at BeehiveCon 2017. Marcelo Arujo gave a talk about Beehive on FreeNAS. Philip Buehler gave a work in progress talk on Vagrant and VMM, the OpenBSD hypervisor, and then Mihai Karabas, Marie, Elena, Alexandru, and Darius, students of Mihai's from the Polytechnic University in Bucharest, gave their work in progress on various Beehive things, including Beehive on ARM v7, Beehive on ARM v8, Suspend and Resume, and the Virtual Interrupt Controller, each of which had a full paper presentation in AsiaBSDcon proper.
Yeah, they mentioned that they had a full track of their own, pretty much a full room where only on the second day of the paper session where they presented after each other, so they filled out the full room just for Beehive topics, which was nice. And I guess we will see them again at EuroBSDcon because that is in Romania as well, in the same university where they're from.
Yeah. And then it was conference time already. It's like, what? I just got here. I was supposed to have a whole bunch of days. Yeah, then we had the many presentations covering things from isolated and virtualized hosts to packaging base for NetBSD, tuning FreeBSD for routing, building security appliances, FreeBSD on Power architecture, porting FreeBSD to ARM, using Mininet and OpenBSD to do software-defined networking, profiling FreeBSD's boot process to figure out why it takes so long, improving Dragonfly BSD's network stack, doing role-based access control in the Beaches web framework. Then, as we mentioned, virtualization on ARM v8, which is ARM64, how OpenBSD is used to run X-ray machines, a generic interrupt controller for Beehive, improving NetDump on FreeBSD using iflib, for I/O devices for ARM on like ARM32, Linux rump kernels on NetBSD, the FreeBSD VPC, which is a little bit of software-defined networking, a little bit of virtualization, and a little bit of everything. And lastly, FreeBSD Save and Restore, which is the first step towards live migration in Beehive.
Yep, very exciting to hear that this is going to be happening or is already in the final stages of being implemented. So look out for when we'll certainly make an announcement when that is available on the show, and I guess people will look forward to trying that out for themselves.
Yeah, with a bunch of great presentations and, as usual, an amazing hallway track. It was definitely worth the trip. If it was a really, really long trip.
Yeah. What I liked also this year was there were a lot of new people there who haven't been to AsiaBSDcon before. So either speakers or regular attendees who didn't give a talk, but new faces are also good to see and just show them around. Oh, how do you like Tokyo and things like that. And some of those, like Olivier Cochard-Labé, he pretty much he arrived a couple of days even before we arrived. So, and he did all kinds of things already that I didn't even done. And this is my third year in Tokyo. So, wow, they totally went for it.
Yeah. It's great to see many old friends and a bunch of new faces and spend time discussing the latest things that were happening in BSD and just in the lives of our friends and so on. And then it was also nice to meet a number of people who, say we were the ones that encouraged them to come with the podcast and so on. I got our pictures taken with a couple of people. And actually, I ran into a Scale Engine customer who was attending the conference.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
Yes. The sysadmin from one of our customers happened to have gotten invited to the conference by a friend of his who was coming for the BSD content. And actually, a couple of weeks before the conference, they emailed us. It's like, hey, I saw your logo on the website for this conference I'm going to. Are you guys going to be there? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there.
Oh,
it's like, I was on the program committee.
Yeah, excellent. So that was certainly a nice experience. And, we should definitely mention the sponsors and all the organizing people, because they did most of the work, and the sponsors made sure that there was actually a conference happening, because it requires some money, not also for preparing all the stuff for the conference itself, but also, I guess, paying for speaker travel and accommodation. So the conference was sponsored by the FreeBSD Foundation, the Internet Initiative of Japan, S2 Factory M Systems, hope to get that right, SkyMiser, who also sponsored BSD Taiwan in November last year, Dragonfly BSD, Gandhi.net, and of course the Japan NetBSD's user group, as well as Scale Engine. So
yes,
thanks for those.
Thanks to the program committee, which consisted of George Neville Neal, Hidetoshi Shimokura, sorry about that, Masanobu Saito from NetBSD, Henning Bauer from OpenBSD, Li Wen-su, Kevin Lowe, and myself making up the program committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we look forward to next year, wherever that might be or when it might be.
Mm-hmm. We'll keep you informed as we find out.
Yep. And as videos start to appear in the next couple of weeks or months, we'll mention those on the show, so you can rewatch what's been discussed there or what talks were given, so you can get a glimpse of what the conference was like. Okay, but it wasn't all just conferences that was happening last week, but also other interesting stuff happened. So most people who weren't at the conference were busy implementing certain things like Meltdown and Spectre mitigations for FreeBSD 11.1. So these are the stable releases. The patches have been in head for a couple of weeks already, but this is now MFC'd from head to a stable branch. So we have here the advisory, basically describing, what this issue is all about for people who have been living under a rock for the last couple of months.
So this is the security patch release for FreeBSD 11.1, providing mitigations against the speculative execution vulnerabilities known as Meltdown and Spectre V2. So the speculative execution vulnerability mitigation is still a work in progress. This advisory addresses the most significant issues for FreeBSD 11.1 on AMD 64 CPUs. We expect this to update this advisory to include FreeBSD 10.3 and 10.4 for AMD 64 CPUs in the future. Also, further FreeBSD releases will address this issue on i386 and on other CPUs as well. FreeBSD update will include changes on i386 as part of this update due to common code that's shared between AMD 64 and i386. However, it contains no functional change on i386. In particular, it does not actually mitigate this issue on i386 currently. So, not everything is fixed yet, but most people are running AMD 64 on servers and desktops nowadays. So, many modern processors have implementation issues that allow unprivileged attackers to bypass the user kernel or inter-process memory access restrictions by exploiting speculative execution and shared resources like caches. So a number of issues related to speculative execution were found last year and publicly announced on January 3rd. Two of these, known as Meltdown and Spectre V2, are addressed by this patch. The first one, Meltdown. This issue relies on an affected CPU speculatively executing instructions beyond a faulting instruction. When this happens, changes in architectural state are not committed, but observable changes may be left in microarchitectural state, such as caches, and this may be used to infer privileged data. So while the instruction stops and doesn't actually finish, the result might be in the cache, and someone might be able to use that to figure out what the result was of the instruction that they weren't actually allowed to do, and that could leak information. Then Spectre V2 uses branch target injection to speculatively execute kernel code at an address under the control of an attacker. So this is tricking the CPU in its branch prediction to going down a branch you want rather than one of the original ones as part of the code.
That makes it exploitable, or at least more predictable, where the code is going to.
So there's no available workarounds for these other than replace the CPU with a not vulnerable one, of which there are none for sale at the moment.
Yeah, or you don't want to run down in the data center and exchange every CPU and running hosts or the servers.
Yep. So you can apply these patches, just FreeBSD update fetch, FreeBSD update install, and then reboot. And there's some more detail about how each of these works. So for Meltdown, the mitigation is known as page table isolation, or PTI. PTI largely separates kernel and user mode page tables so that even during speculative execution, most of the kernel's data is unmapped and therefore not accessible. A demonstration of the Meltdown vulnerability is available on GitHub here from FreeBSD developer Dag Erling. A positive result is definitive, that is, the vulnerability exists with certainty on your machine. However, a negative result indicates either that the CPU is not affected or that the test is not capable of demonstrating the issue on the CPU, and the demonstration may need to be improved. So a negative result isn't definitive, but a positive result is. If you apply this patch, it will automatically enable PTI if you have an Intel CPU. You can check the status of the PTI feature by looking at the sysctl vm.pmap.pti. The default setting can be overridden by setting the loader tunable vm.pmap.pti in /boot/loader.conf, and will take effect after a reboot. Note that PTI introduces a performance regression, that the observable performance loss is significant in micro benchmarks of system call overhead, but much smaller in most real workloads. And then in Spectre, there are two common mitigations for Spectre. This patch includes a mitigation that uses the indirect branch restricted speculation feature that's available on some CPUs by applying a microcode update. So you have to apply the update to the microcode and have this patch from FreeBSD, and then it will restrict the indirect branch prediction and resolve the vulnerability. The alternative mitigation, called retpoline, which is short for return trampoline, is a feature available in newer compilers. The feasibility of applying the retpoline feature to the compilers in the stable branches and releases is still under investigation. It'd be quite an uplift to merge a newer version of Clang back to older FreeBSD without breaking anything or risking breaking anything. And so it's not their first choice.
Yeah, of course not.
So this patch includes the IBRS mitigation for Spectre V2. To use the mitigation, the system must have updated microcode. With older microcode, a patched kernel will still work, but it won't provide the mitigation. So you can control the feature, IBRS, by setting the hardware.ibrs_disable sysctl. So if you set that to 0, it's on, and if it's set to 1, it's off. And you can check the status of the feature via the hw.ibrs_active sysctl, which will tell you whether the CPU has support for it and if it's enabled. So if IBRS active is 1, then you're protected. If it's 0 and you haven't disabled it, it means you don't have the newer microcode yet.
Okay, yeah. So that's the thing to make that work. So definitely, if you're unstable and you're using a release, use FreeBSD update. Otherwise, use the described way in the patch notes.
Yep. And they show where it was fixed in stable and in the release. And if you're still on FreeBSD 10, you should either upgrade to 11 or wait a little bit, and they'll have patches backported to 10 as well.
Yep,
And
excellent.
More details on the microcode update will be coming shortly.
Yeah, the more the more patches we learn about the other yet not fully solved problems, we'll let you know on this show, of course, because we're as affected as you.
A wiki page on wiki.freebsd.org about speculative execution vulnerabilities, and it has a table that shows where the current status of everything, including each of the 3 vulnerabilities, and then across each of the different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and sign up, and you can have a FreeBSD machine up and running in under 55 seconds.
Yep, right to get your little project started without delay, because it's quick and easy. You basically select which kind of droplet size you want. That is the name for their virtual machines in the cloud, and how much memory, CPU it should have, how much disk space, and then you hit start, and it should instantiate momentarily, so you can SSH into it.
Best news yet. Droplets are now up to 55% cheaper, including the cheapest $5 droplet now comes with a gigabyte of RAM instead of only 512 megabytes.
Yeah, that's very nice. You also get, instead of 20 gigabytes, 25 gigabytes of SSD memory.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a lot of stuff been bumped up. So the $10 per month gets from 1 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes of RAM, and from 30 gigabytes of SSD space to 50 gigabytes. So you can already do a lot of stuff on these machines, even the smaller ones.
Yeah, and then with the introduction of the new $15 flexible size, you can choose between 1, 2, or 3 gigabytes of RAM, or 1, 2, or 3 CPUs. So if you need more CPU or more RAM, or a mix of both, you can choose that. And then either way, you get 60 gigabytes of disk and 3 terabytes of traffic.
Yeah, that's always a lot. Also,
hard to beat that for 2.2 cents per hour.
Yeah, and if you're really in need of a lot of power, then you can look at the $240 per month, which gives you 48 gigabytes of memory, 12 CPUs, and 960 gigabytes of SSD.
Yep.
Wow. On top of that, they also provide you great management options like team functionality, or a way to monitor your systems so you can see how much CPU and RAM they're currently using. And also you can say, well, I want to run this specific application, but I don't want to spend too much time installing it and looking for sources or whatnot, because they also provide prepackaged software, like one-click applications. You select what you want to have, like a MySQL server maybe, or a LAMP stack, and that will be then instantiated in your droplet, and you can then use the software and configure it to your liking without messing with the installation.
Yep. So head over there, check it out. Use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, and you'll get a $10 credit in your account.
Yep. Okay. Next up, we have an interview on text, at least, with MidnightBSD founder and lead developer Lucas Holt. So this is in an interview style. So I guess one of us will read the questions and the other one answers.
I'll do the questions.
Okay.
So it says, recently I've taken a little dip into the world of BSD. As part of my attempt to understand the BSD world a little better, I connected with Lucas Holt, the founder and lead developer of MidnightBSD, to ask him a few questions about his project. So the first question is, please explain MidnightBSD in a nutshell. How is it different than other BSDs?
Yeah, so here's the answer from Lucas Holt. MidnightBSD is a desktop-focused operating system. When it's considered stable, it will provide a full desktop experience. This differs from other efforts such as TrueOS or GhostBSD in that it's not a distro of FreeBSD, but rather a fork. MidnightBSD has its own package manager, mport, as well as unique package cluster software and several features built into userland, such as MDNS responder, libdispatch, and customizations throughout the system.
So who is MidnightBSD actually aimed at?
So the goal with MidnightBSD has always been to provide a desktop OS that's usable for everyday tasks and that even somewhat non-technical people can use. Early versions of macOS 10 were certainly an inspiration. In practice, we're rather far from that goal at this point, but it's been an excellent learning opportunity.
So tell us about your background in computing.
So Lucas Holt basically started in technical support at a small ISP and moved into web design and system administration. And while there, he learned BSDI, Solaris, and Linux. He started tinkering with programming web applications in ASP and a little Perl CGI. Then did a mix of programming and system administration jobs through college and graduated with a Bachelor of Computer Science from Eastern Michigan University. And during that time, he learned NetBSD and FreeBSD, started working on several projects such as porting Apple's HFS Plus code to FreeBSD 6 and working on getting the Enforce 2 chipset SATA controller working with FreeBSD, also that's version 6, with the latter getting committed also. He got a real taste for BSD, and after seeing the lack of interest in the community for desktop BSDs, he started MidnightBSD and began working on that in late 2005. Currently, he's a senior software engineer focusing on backend REST services by day and a part-time graduate student at the University of Michigan Flint.
So the magazine then asks, I recently installed TrueOS. I was disappointed with a couple of the programs I wanted to use when they're not available. The FreeBSD port system looked mildly complicated for beginners. I'm used to using Pacman to get the job done quickly. How does MidnightBSD deal with ports?
Yeah, so MidnightBSD has its own port system, mports, which shared similarities with FreeBSD ports as well as some ideas from OpenBSD. They decided early on that decent package management was essential for regular users. Power users will still use ports for certain software, but it's just so time-consuming to build everything. They started work on their own package manager, mport, and every package is a tar LZMA archive with a SQLite 3 manifest file, as well as an SQLite 3 index that's downloaded from their servers. And this allows users to query and customize the package system with standard SQL queries. We're also building more user-friendly graphical tools. And package availability is another issue that most BSDs have. Really? Software tends to be written for one or two operating systems, and many projects are reluctant to support other systems, particularly smaller projects like MidnightBSD. There are certainly gaps. All of the BSD projects need more volunteers to help with porting software and keeping it up to date. Yeah, that's certainly true.
So during the June 2015 interview on BSD Now, oh, look, somebody watched that. You mentioned that even though you support both i36 and AMD64, that you recommend people choose AMD64. Do you have any plans to drop i36 support in the future, like many others have already done?
Yeah, so Lucas Holt answers to that is that yes, they do plan to drop i386 support, mostly because of the extra work needed to build and maintain the packages. And he's held off on this so far because he had a lot of feedback from users in South America that they still needed it. And for now, the plan is to keep i386 support through the 1.0 release, and that's probably a year or two out. So that's still a bit further out, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what desktop environments does MidnightBSD support?
Yeah, the original plan was to use Etoile as a desktop environment, but that project changed focus. We currently support XFCE, GNOME 3, Window Maker, GNU Step, plus G Workspace as a primary choice. We also have several other Windows Manager and desktop environments available, such as Enlightenment, Rat Poison, Afterstep, and others. Early versions offered KDE 3.x, but they had some issues with KDE 4. They may revisit that with newer versions in the future.
What is MidnightBSD's default file system? And do you support Dragonfly BSD's Hammer file system? And what other file system?
Yeah, so Lucas Holt says to that boot volumes are UFS 2. They also support ZFS for additional storage. They have read support for exFAT, NTFS, ext2, CD9660, which is the CD ISO file system, and NFS 3 and 4 are also supported for network file systems. They do not support Hammer, although it was considered, and they would love to see Hammer 2 get added to MidnightBSD eventually.
Is MidnightBSD affected by the recent Spectre and Meltdown issues?
Short answer, yes. Most operating systems were affected by these issues. They were not informed of the issue until the general public became aware. Work is ongoing to come up with appropriate mitigations, and unfortunately, they do not have a patch yet.
The Raspberry Pi and its many clones have made the ARM platform very popular. Are there any plans to make MidnightBSD available on that platform?
So they have no immediate plans. ARM is an interesting architecture, but by the very nature of system-on-chip design, it takes a lot of work to support a broad number of devices. It might be possible when they stop supporting i386 or if someone volunteers to do the work on the ARM port. Eventually, they think that most hobby systems will need to run AMD or ARM chips. Intel's planning on locking down hardware with UEFI 3, and this make it difficult to run on commodity hardware in the future, not only for MidnightBSD, but other systems as well. At one point, MidnightBSD ran on SPARC 64. When workstations were killed off, they dropped support, and a desktop operating system on a server platform makes little sense.
And does MidnightBSD offer support for Linux applications?
Yes, they offer Linux emulation. It's emulating a 2.6.16 kernel, and that's currently and needs to be updated to support newer apps, of course. It's possible to run semi-recent versions of Firefox, Thunderbird, Java, and OpenOffice on it. They also used it to host game servers in the past and play older games such as Quake 3 and Enemy Territory.
Could you comment on the recent dust-up between the Pale Moon browser developers and the team behind the OpenBSD port system?
Yeah, so there's a little explanation what that is all about. But his answer is he found this discussion frustrating. Many of the BSD projects hear a lot of complaints about browser availability and compatibility. With Firefox moving to Rust, it makes it even more difficult. When you get into branding issues like Firefox, the Pale Moon developers have decided to protect their brand at the cost of users. Unlike the Firefox developers, they've made even stronger requirements for branding. It is not possible to use a system library version of anything with Pale Moon and keep their branding requirements. As such, we cannot offer Pale Moon in MidnightBSD. The reason this is an issue for open source project is that many third-party libraries are used in something as complex as a web browser. For instance, Gecko-based browsers use several multimedia libraries, SQLite 3 for the bookmarks, audio and video codecs, and trying to maintain upstream patches for each of those items is difficult. That's why the BSDs have ports collections to begin with. It allows us to track and manage custom patches to make all these libraries work, and they go through a lot of effort in keeping these up to date. Sometimes upstream patches don't get included. That means our versions are the only working copies. With Pale Moon's policy, we need to submit several patches to their customized versions of all these libraries too, and any new releases of the browser would not be available as changes occur. It might not even be possible to compile Pale Moon without a patch locally. And with regard to Rust, it requires porting the language as well as an appropriate version of LLVM before you can even start on the browser.
If someone wanted to contribute to your project, both financially and technically, how would they do so?
Yeah, Lucas Holt says here that financial assistance for the project can be submitted online. They have a page outlining how to make donations with Patreon, PayPal, and via Bitcoin even. Donations are not tax deductible. You can learn more at MidnightBSD/donate. And they also need assistance with translations, porting applications, and working on the actual operating system. Interested parties can contact them on the mailing list or through the IRC channel on Freenode. This is MidnightBSD. And we also use assistance, or they also could use assistance with mirroring ISOs and packages.
So, itsfoss.com would like to thank Lucas for taking the time to reply to many questions. For more information about MidnightBSD or to download it, visit their website. The most recent version is 0.8.6.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever played around with MidnightBSD? What is your favorite version of BSD? If you found this article interesting, please take a minute to share it on social media.
Yeah, so if you have someone who's been using that, then we would love to hear from that experience. Send us something at feedback@bsdnow.tv so we can cover it in a future episode. So, time for the news roundup this week. We have a rather long part here, which is 8 months with TrueOS, of course. And this is a journal article, a longer one. and it's basically describing the experiences running TrueOS for 8 months, as the name suggests.
Yeah. So the author says, I vowed to write down what I felt about TrueOS if I ever got to 6 months of using it. This is just that, although slightly delayed, being 8 months. This is neither a tutorial nor a piece of evangelism dedicated towards it. This is also not a review of specific parts of TrueOS, such as Lumina or AppCafe, since I don't use them at all. In the spirit of presenting a screenshot, here's my i3WM display showing 4 windows on one screen, a configuration that I never use. The primary task that I get onto with this computer. I need a tiling window manager with multi-desktop capability. As regards that I do with the computer, it is fairly straightforward to describe if I just list the most frequently used applications, including Xterm, which is your command line interface, Emacs, IntelliJ IDEA, which lets you write Java and so on, Firefox, the web browser, Thunderbird, Not Much Mail, which is his email client, Chromium, which is another web browser, Telegram desktop, WeChat with WeSlack, CMUS, the music player, MPV, the video player, Transmission GTK, which is a torrent client, Postgres 10, RabbitMQ C file, which is a file syncing system, Shotwell, which is a tool to manage pictures, GIMP is just a video or
image manipulation tool.
Yeah. Calibre, which is an ebook system, and VirtualBox. All of these are available as binary packages from the repository. Since I use IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, I decided to download the Node JDK Linux version from the website rather than install it. This will make sure it gets updated regularly. So, why did they pick TrueOS? I ran various Linux distributions from 2001 all the way up until 2009 when I discovered Arch Linux, and continued with it until 2017. I tried out Void Linux for 2 months before switching to TrueOS. Over the last few years, I started feeling like no matter which Linux distribution I touched, they all just stopped making a lot of sense, generally in the way things were organized, and particularly in terms of software like systemd, which just got pushed down my throat. I couldn't wrap my head around half the things going on in my system. Mostly, I found that Linux distributions stopped being a collection of applications that got developed together to something more coupled by software mechanisms like systemd, and what process was more or more opaque. I didn't want to talk about the merits and demerits of systemd, let's just say that I found it of no use and an unnecessary hassle. So in February, I found myself in charge of the entire technology stack of a company, and I was free to make choices. A friend who is a longtime FreeBSD user convinced me to try that on the servers. My requirement was that it run Postgres, RabbitMQ, Nginx, and a couple of JVM processes. The setup was zero hassle, and it hasn't changed much in a year. About 3 months of running FreeBSD 11 on servers was enough for me to consider it on my laptop. I was very much apprehensive of hardware support, but luckily my computer is a ThinkPad, and ThinkPads sort of work out of the box on the various BSDs. But his general requirements were to run IntelliJ IDEA, which is a integrated development environment for Java, must have proper graphics and sound driver support, and must be able to run VirtualBox. So I had a pick of FreeBSD, NetBSD, or OpenBSD, and since there were the major BSDs that they were familiar with. One of my requirements was that I needed to be able to run VMs just in case I needed to test something on Windows or Linux. This ruled out OpenBSD. Then I was left with NetBSD or FreeBSD, but NetBSD's driver support for newer Intel chipsets was questionable, and so FreeBSD was the only choice then. When I was digging through FreeBSD forums, I found out that running the 11 version on my laptop was out of the question since it didn't have proper drivers for the chipset either. That has now changed, thankfully. A few more hours of digging led me to GhostBSD and TrueOS. I picked TrueOS straight away because TrueOS came from the old So they downloaded the unstable version in June of 2017, backed up all their data in Hope Directory, and installed it. There were no glitches during the installation. I simply followed the instructions as described in the handbook, and everything was fine. My entire switch from Arch/Void to TrueOS took about an hour, discounting the time it took to back up the data to the external hard drive. It was easy, everything I wanted worked, and it was available in the repos.
Okay. So that's already something people can use to make a decision whether they want to try it out themselves.
Yeah. So they have some tweaks they discovered for setting up FreeBSD. Includes tweaks like installing certain fonts and playing with the firewall and all that. So on to TrueOS and FreeBSD specific things that they liked. They liked OpenRC, the init system that is familiar and well documented. There's also some TrueOS specific bits that are described and linked there. When I installed Postgres 10 server, there was no OpenRC script for it, but I could cobble one together in 2 hours with zero prior experience writing init scripts. Later on, I figured out that the init script for Postgres 9 would work with 10, and I could have just used that.
Okay.
Another definite win was boot environments. This was an alien concept to me, but the first time I did an update without waiting for a CDN sync to finish, my computer booted into the shell and remained there. The friendly people on TrueOS Discourse asked me to roll back to an earlier BE and wait for the sync to finish. I dug through the forums and found the Zfs Snapshot basics and how to use them on the new TrueOS. This describes what Zfs and boot environments are and is well worth reading. So in particular, Zfs. My experience with boot environments was enough to convince me that the utility of Zfs is amazing. I was
You're
just
not alone
reading
in
about
that.
it and trying things out whenever, and whatever I read just convinced me more and more about why it is such a good thing. So the file system layout. Coming from the Linux world, how the FreeBSD file system is laid out seemed odd at first. Then I realized it was the Linux distros that were doing the odd things. For example, the whole OS is split into base system and applications. All the non-base system configuration and apps go under user local. This makes a lot of sense. The entire OS is developed along with its applications as a single coherent entity, and that shows. Then they have the documentation. The handbooks for both FreeBSD and TrueOS are really, really good. For example, if I kept some files in the Lux encrypted drive, which I used on Archlinks, to find the equivalent I had to do was read the handbook and look at the Geli section. It was actually nice being able to go to a source like the handbook for things that just worked. Arch Linux and Gentoo have excellent documentation as well, if anyone is considering a Linux distro. Then on to community. The TrueOS community on both Telegram as well as on Discourse are very friendly and patient. They help out a lot and do not get upset when I pose really stupid questions. The TrueOS core developers hang out in the Telegram chat room too, and it's nice to be able to talk to them directly about things. What did not work on TrueOS? The following things that worked entirely during my Linux tenure didn't work on TrueOS. Netflix, Google Hangouts, and Electron-based apps like Slack and Skype. I know Google Hangouts worked for a little bit, but then broke again. I'm not sure what's up there, but I can say it's really not TrueOS's fault there. There were no major concerns for these kinds of work I do. It doesn't bother me much. I run a Windows XP VM to play some old games and a Bunsen Lab installation for Linux things like Hangouts and Netflix. I don't have a video calling system set up in TrueOS because I use my phone for both voice and video calls exclusively. So, why am I staying on TrueOS? Because it's a great community. Whether on Discord or on the Telegram channel, the people make you feel welcome. If things go unanswered, someone will promise to work on it, file a bug, or suggest a workaround. Switching to TrueOS was philosophical as well. I thought a lot more about licenses, and I've arrived at the conclusion that I like the BSD license more than the GPL. I believe it is more practical. I believe TrueOS is improving continuously and is a great desktop Unix if you put the time into it.
That's a good summary from a user. It's not just, I used a couple of desktop applications, but this is pretty much 8 months of full-time or full use of the one operating system that pretty much provides most applications that you would normally use nowadays.
Yeah, I've been rocking my FreeBSD workstation at work. Basically, my exclusive machine during work hours every day. And it's been working great for me. Although I admit my usage is kind of light in as far as what people need. It's like I have many Q consoles running, or Q terminal, the Qt extern, basically. Many Firefox windows, some Thunderbird, Quasel for IRC, and Komodo Edit for a text editor. And, most of my job consists of SSHing into things and doing stuff. But Komodo Edit as a text editor, some SVN commands, and I do my entire job from that FreeBSD machine. And we have a Windows machine in the corner we use for the video conferencing stuff. Would be interested in Google Hangouts working nicely on FreeBSD, but some of the people we have to meet with use Zoom instead, which is just weird and was never going to work on anything but Windows, basically. And, in a pinch, I always have my Mac laptop, too.
Yeah, so what I like about this setup is that with boot environments, all these desktop applications put in a lot of dependencies, like build dependencies or run dependencies, and if one of those didn't work out or there's a broken library or something, then with boot environments you can get your working desktop back because, you just roll back to the snapshot before the update.
Especially with my work machine, always hesitant to change something on it because it might cause problems or whatever. But this way, literally, create the boot environment, install updates. If it doesn't work, reboot, select the old boot environment, everything's back. And any code I've written, which is saved in home directory or whatever, doesn't get rolled back, so I don't lose any work.
Okay, so a lot of stuff, as we mentioned, has been discussed at conferences. And in this next item, we have that the AsiaBSDcon 2016, so 2 years ago, the videos from that conference are now available thanks to Alan and some help that he got to make this work.
So the entire program is online now, starting with the opening ceremony, going through Brooks Davis's presentation on CherryBSD, Beehive ATA emulation, how to break long-term compatibility in NetBSD, FreeBSD test cluster automation, M-tree parsing and manipulation for NetBSD, or FreeBSD, I forget, implementing Zen PVHVM drivers for OpenBSD, a project update session, which included updates from all the different BSD projects, Zen HVM Lite and FreeBSD, FreeBSD-based high-density file servers, bitrig ports and packaging for uncommon operating systems, Casper and Capsicum, directory services for FreeNAS, the new security models of NetBSD, TLEM, which is very high-speed link emulation using NetMap, permissive license smart and raw disk commands, peripheral side USB support on NetBSD, a pure capability-based security for Unix, which is Cloud API, type-aware kernel virtual memory access, which is an update for the CTF tools for dtrace, improving the FreeBSD translation tools, measuring and improving IPsec on FreeBSD, booting from encrypted disks on FreeBSD, running an ISP on OpenBSD, the early days of Unix, the lessons learned from Steve Bourne, the inventor of the shell. So you might want to check that out. Improving high bandwidth TLS in the FreeBSD kernel from Netflix. Social BSD, a review of diversity and inclusivity in the BSD community. OpenBSD's rc.d from Antoine Jacotot. a brief history of the BSD fast file system, which is also known as UFS, and FreeBSD on the Cavium ThunderX system on a chip, and then finally a work in progress session of all the project updates, little things people are working on.
Yep, this must have been this is the one, my very first AsiaBSDcon. So might be want to rewatch some of those videos to reminisce the good times I had, or the videos I didn't saw.
Yes, with 3 tracks currently, you can only have been in one room at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, so good effort to have those available. And by the time you watched all these, you can make sure that the 2018 videos should be available as well.
Yeah. So the 2017 videos are also up, but we'll talk about that next week. And apparently the 2018 videos are being shipped to me now, and we can get the video editing process started for that.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
So we should mention our second sponsor for this week, which is IX Systems, because Alan's been using their systems not only for encoding the videos from AsiaBSDcon, but for other interesting stuff. So head over to ixsystems.com if you are in need for a server for your open source project at home or in the office in the business. Then check out IX Systems because they can build you the proper server for your open source server needs. Whether it is a backup system or a big data cluster that I have, not from IX in this case, but they can build you certainly a similar or even better system, or other things that you might need, some file servers maybe, and that's what IX Systems can build for you.
Yeah, in our case, they built the primary and the backup of our video storage system, and in particular helped me design it so that I could grow it over time without having to spend all the money up front. And any day now, we should receive delivery of another 32 12 terabyte disks to expand the size of our storage pools.
Yeah, because IX Systems is using ZFS very heavily inside our servers because that makes the storage reliable and secure. So that is also a plus for them as a vendor. And
they actually understand ZFS and how it works and can make the right recommendations for which hardware will give you the best bang for your buck on ZFS.
Yeah, even the small servers, the FreeNAS Mini and Mini XL use ZFS internally, so you can start small with your office or home backup needs on those. And they use ZFS internally, and you can add up to 8 storage drives for maximum capacity to those, so totaling 48 terabytes of storage.
Yep. They also have an article over on their blog, including the GDPR countdown, which is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming into force on May 25th.
And we're not prepared. It's coming, but most companies or even we as a university haven't looked at it too much. It will be, this thing is happening next month or next week, and we haven't done it yet. So but it's good that IX Systems has an eye on that and what it entails. So that's good. They were also showcasing their TrueOS system at Scale, which also happened in parallel to AsiaBSDcon last week.
Yes, I would expect some blog posts from them about that. We can cover those next week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so give IX Systems a call and look up ixsystems.com/BSD Now for a server buying guide in case you are in the market for a new server. And that contains a couple of questions you should ask your other vendors, because all these things are being covered by IX Systems, and you will quickly discover that other vendors do not have that amount of support or services available.
So then we have an update from OpenBSD that now syspatch will be provided for both supported releases. So there's a commit here. It says syspatch will now provide now be provided for both supported releases, thanks to all the developers involved in providing these patches. The official announcement has been released. I'm happy to announce that we are now able to produce 2 releases worth of Zfs patches on the AMD 64 and i36 platform. The binary patches for 6.1 will hit the mirror shortly, and you'll be able to catch up on the errata. Using the syspatch utility, people running AMD 64 will thus get the Meltdown workaround. This means, in particular, that 6.2 will remain supported by syspatch even once 6.3 comes out, whereas previously only the most recent version was supported. Special thanks to Robert and Antoine Jacotot for their amazing work on syspatch and for all their help. Thanks again to TJ and the volunteers from OpenBSD for their timely testing, and of course for Theo for overseeing it all.
Yeah, good news for the OpenBSD folks. So using sys patches will give you a way to update and patch your system. Okay, our next story is about exploring permutations and a mystery with BSD and GNU split file names. So that's something we found, and we found it to be interesting enough to put it in the show. So in this blog post, the author explores that he was recently playing around with the split command, which is a command line tool on macOS 10, and he decided to chop a 4,000 line file into 4,000 separate single line files. However, when he attempted to run split-ll, he ran into a funny error.
L1.
Oh, L1? Oh, yeah, it's difficult to make out. Yeah.
One line.
So L1, because you want to have just one line in each new file. Then split gave an error which says too many files. Curious to see if any splitting had occurred, he ran ls, and sure enough, a huge list of file names appeared, such as, well, XAA, XAB, and so on, leading up to XYZ to XZZ, which were the last ones. And now he could see why you'd run out of unique file names. There are only 26 letters in the alphabet, and these file names were only 3 letters long. Also, they all seem to begin with the letter X. So he discovered a little bit more that BSD's split file name defaults. So he checked the manual for split's defaults and confirmed that what he was seeing, because the man page says each file into which the file is split is named by the prefix followed by a lexically ordered suffix using suffix _ length characters in the range of from A to Z. If -A is not specified, 2 letters are used as the suffix, and with the prefix X and with suffixes as above. So got it? So running split with the defaults for prefix name and suffix length will give me the file names that always start with the letter X, followed by 2 letters alphabetical permutations composed of A to Z letters, which repeats as allowed. He said repeats allowed because he noticed file names such as XAA and XBB in the output. So there's a side note here. The reason why he said permutations or wrote permutations rather than combinations is because letter order matters. For example, XAB and XBA are 2 distinct and legitimate file names. And there's a nice explanation about that in a separate link provided. So, doing some math here. Some permutation math. So how many file names can you get from the BSD split tool using the defaults? There are permutation formulas out there for repeating values and non-repeating values. Based on split's behavior, he wanted to use the repeating values formula. So n over r, where n equals the number of possible values, 26 for A to Z, and r equals the number of values, 2, which since there are only 2 letters after x in the file name, so 2 to the power 26 to the power of 2 is 676. So the total number of file name permutations allowed with BSD split defaults should be 676. So to double check that, he ran ls and piped that to word count -l and to get the total number of files in his split test directory. The output was 677. If you subtract his original input file, the input txt, then you have 676 files, or the number of permutations split would allow before running out of file names. Neat. But he still wanted his 4,000 files. So more permutations, please. While 26 to the power of 2 permutations doesn't support 4,000 different file names, he wondered if he could increase R to 3. Then he'd have 17,576 different file name permutations to play with. More than enough. Earlier, he remembered the manual mentioning suffix length, so with -h, -a, that provides the suffix length, and use that to form the suffix of the file name. So he passed 3 in with the -a flag, and guess what? He got his 4,000 files. So if you run split -l1 -a3 and then the input txt and then do an ls and pipe that to word count, you get your 4,000 files plus the one that was the original input file. But that was a lot of work. It would be great if Split would just handle these permutations and suffix lengths by default. In fact, he vaguely remembers splitting large files into smaller ones with numerical file names, which he would prefer. He also remembered not having to worry about suffixes in the past, but numerical file names didn't seem to be an option with Split installed on macOS 10. There was no mention of it in the manual. Turns out that it was remembering GNU Split from using the Debian operating system 2 years ago. Different flavor of the Split tool with different defaults and behaviors. So he installed GNU Split, and you can snag the GNU version of several command line utilities using brew install core utils. That's homebrew on macOS 10, similar to BSD ports. For further reading, there are links provided, and so by default now you have the new command available with a G prefix because GNU. So he ran gsplit instead of split, -l1 and the input text file to try that out. No errors here. GNU Split automatically adjusts the file name suffix length so that he has enough to cover 4,000 file names. And you can see here in the examples, he wanted to take a closer look at the default permutations using gsplit, and with a bit of AWK magic and sort, you can find those out. And now it gets interesting because after double-checking the line counts to ensure they were a complete manifest of both split and gsplit's file names, we can find out that when using vimdiff to compare the manifests, he noticed something a little odd. A mystery and some experiments. So here's the mystery. While gsplit's permutations contain 3-letter file names starting with X, vimdiff immediately highlighted 26 missing 3-letter permutations, XZA through XZZ. Weird. So here's the output, a bit of graphics. And yeah, so what's the file name pattern? The assumption was that somehow gsplit knew that it was about to run out of file name permutations, 26 files in advance, so at 26 to the power of R minus 26. Then it would preemptively switch to using a new 2-letter combination prefix, XZ, with longer 3-letter suffixes. The new pattern would accommodate a total of 17,576 file names, or 26 to the power of 3. Nothing in man gsplit described this automatic prefix and suffix length increase, so he decided to keep playing around. So he created a bunch of more import files, and in conclusion, at the end, in summary, gsplit's default file name behavior is to add a letter to the prefix and suffix of a file name whenever it reaches 26 to the power of R, minus 26 files, with R being the current length of the suffix. So you don't need to worry about running out of file names, just disk space. He's sure someone has already written about this behavior, default naming, and before, but it was really fun to go through the process and figure out how the naming worked. In practice, his personal preference is gsplit's numeric suffix because they're easier for him to navigate. And there's something like this: gsplit -- numeric - suffixes equals 1, -a4 and -l1 with the input file, and then some custom prefix you can provide. And that way, all your files have that prefix and the splits.
Yeah. I suppose you could change BSD split to support numeric prefixes. It's not a bad idea. Although I would say that gsplit's behavior of getting to the letter Z and then just changing file name formats is not necessarily that helpful. It happens to still lexigraphically sort correctly, so I suppose it's okay, but it's also surprising and not mentioned in the man page, and you can see why that's, not the right thing to do necessarily.
Yep. But it's one of those examples where we can see where the BSD implementation differs from the GNU implementation. No matter if it's better or worse, that's sometimes up to the user. But at least people should be aware that these tools sometimes are different, and the man page should be read before using them in case some of the option switches are different or have a different behavior, so that there's no surprise when using it. So, BSD Bits for this week start off with Michael W. Lucas because he's speaking at mug.org on April 10th. So that's a short info on his blog, of course. On April 10th, 2018, he'll be giving a talk at mug.org. Each mug meeting has 2 presentations, one long and one short. Somehow they've given him both of them. So his first longer talk will be on ZFS, including some newer developments. The second talk, he's not saying. The Mug Talks coordinator, JM, agreed to let him speak on a topic of his next book, the one with the undisclosed topic, without knowing what the topic is. This gives him a hard deadline. Either he's in a position to announce the book by then, or the project fails. But hey, no pressure. So if you want to know the topic of MWL's secret book, which he's been blogging about under that same hashtag, show up at mug.org on April 10th. And in unrelated news, MUG is a great group that can always use volunteers. For example, he suspects they might desperately need a new talk coordinator on 11th April. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, if you're able to make that one.
If you didn't get the hint, it's because he's suggesting the current talk coordinator will be fired for having invited Michael W. Lucas.
Yeah. Yeah, so check it out. And if you have a chance to go there, then make that happen because Lucas. Just because for Lucas, you just go.
Yep.
And also for the other people attending the meeting.
Yes. Also, Package Source Con will be July 7th and 8th in Berlin. It's the annual technical conference for the people who work on Package Source, a framework for building over 19,000 open source applications, and it is a native package manager on NetBSD, SmartOS, and Minix, and is also portable across to Linux and Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's over the weekend. So if you want to spend the weekend in Berlin with Package Source, that's your time and date to go to.
Mm-hmm. And having been to Berlin, what was it, 2 years ago now?
Yep.
It was a very nice visit.
Yeah, you keep talking about it, so we should make sure that we should repeat this at one point. Mm-hmm. All right, next up is Tint2 Rocks, which is over at Vincent Delft's blog. And let me see. There's a bit of content here. So apparently there's an update to Tint2, or was it developed?
So saying, so after developing my own version of PyPanel, which is a paneling system for Python, I finally prefer Tint2, which offers a lot of flexibility and in fact matches all my requirements. Let me explain a little bit. So a long time ago, I was not... when it wasn't a post, well, the context is the fact that since several years, OpenBSD plus OpenBox, these two systems match perfectly for all my needs, and I've recently looked at Mate, but I definitely do not find value added there. I should look at Lumina, which has evolved a lot in the last 12 months, but regularly OpenBox flexibility amazes me, and you can do a lot with the dynamic menus. To my eye, the only missing element in OpenBox is a panel, and hence Tint2 has the panel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so people should check that out. Next up, we have a couple of announcements for other conferences from the FreeBSD Foundation. So the first one is the Open Source Summit Europe 2018 call for papers. So that is happening in Europe, of course, and in Edinburgh, Scotland. The call for proposals for the 2018 Open Source Summit Europe is now open, and that takes place October 22nd to 24th in Edinburgh, Scotland, or as the locals would say, Edinburgh. More information and the list of suggested topics can be found on that link they provided. And they hope to get a few FreeBSD talks there into this traditionally Linux-focused event. And if you have an idea for a presentation that will fit into one of the suggested categories, but aren't sure how to proceed, please contact the foundation and we'll try to help. The submission deadline for this one is July 1st, 2018. So consider making a trip to Scotland and give your talk there. Next up, the travel grants for BSDcon have been announced. So if you ever wanted to attend BSDcon, but are a little bit short on money sometimes for flights or for accommodation or both, we can apply for a travel grant, and that is now available. The foundation can help you attend BSDcon through our travel grant program. You basically fill out a little form that describes when you want to travel and why you want to travel, your reasons. In case you've never been to BSDcon, this might be a good reason. Or if you have other reasons, then definitely provide those. So that makes us easier to decide. And travel grants are basically related to FreeBSD developers and advocates who need assistance with travel expenses for attending the conferences related to FreeBSD development. And those applications can be submitted until April 30, 2018. And basically, you fill out the form, send it to us. And people are a little bit shy. They sometimes come to me at conferences, to the FreeBSD table or via email and say, yeah, but I don't contribute not that much. I'm not sure whether this travel grant stuff is the right thing for me. Yes, it is. Just fill out the damn form and submit it to us. The worst thing we could do is say no, and you didn't lose much. But if we agree to it, and you get a little bit of your costs covered.
Yes.
So,
we get the value of you having attended BSDcon, and so do you.
Yeah, and you write a little trip report after that, and we'll cover it on the show so that other people can see how cool that was and consider it for the following year. So there's a nice continuation here from people handing over the awesomeness of the conference, basically. Next
There's
up is
also a call for proposals for the BSDcon Developer Summit for FreeBSD. The Dev Summit will feature multiple tracks and will take place on June 6th and 7th, with an additional track taking place as part of BSDcon on June 8th. The bulk of the tracks will be working groups. A working group should contain a small number of people, ideally less than 30, sometimes even less than 20, focused on a particular topic and whose output is a specific plan for the development in that area for the next year. Some example working groups include packaging the base system, development tools and toolchain like LLDB and Valgrind, external toolchains like getting FreeBSD working easily with latest versions of GCC like 8, the graphics subsystem in FreeBSD and keeping that development going and keeping things up to date, ARM v8 and other 64-bit ARM stuff, tracing in the storage stack, in particular something like TCP dump for CAM. I'm looking forward to that. A fault management working group, which is something I'm interested in, and also a working group on recruiting new developers. But if you have an idea for another working group, now's the time to submit that so that they can be worked into the plan and also to figure out which working groups make sense for you. So if you work on FreeBSD or make your living on FreeBSD, you should definitely attend the Developer Summit, and you should either run or attend the working groups that make the most sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. BSDcon is the event for the BSD developers to coordinate, and having a talk there or a working group is definitely a good thing to have, even if you just sit in there and participate in some of the discussions.
So a working group will consist of a chairperson who will be responsible for making this group work. The chair may delegate work to other folks, but only one person should have the final say on so on. There'll be a single paragraph abstract giving a brief overview of what the working group session will cover and what goals you wish to achieve. A possible guest list to identify individuals known to be interested in working on the topic. The proposal should include a list of individuals that you feel must be present for the group to be successful. Part of that goes then into the consideration of travel grants to make sure those people attend, and an agenda with specific topics that the session will cover. Please note that this is a by invitation event. FreeBSD committers are welcome to register themselves on the wiki. If you're not a committer, you must be sponsored by a committer, but you probably know one, or you can contact the chairperson of the working group and explain why you'd be a valuable addition, and they will invite you. Attendees must also attend BSDcon 2018 in order to access the Dev Summit. You have to register and pay for the conference in order to join the Dev Summit.
Mm-hmm. All right. Last but not least, we have freshly available the presentation from Mike Larkin that he did at AsiaBSDcon. Yeah, as part of AsiaBSDcon's BeehiveCon, OpenBSD's VMM update, and you can get the presentation slides that he presented last week. So this is super fresh, which contains the VMM or VMD migration. Not live migration, but at least send and receive, which is nice to see. And he even demoed it. That's not in the slides, but it was, I think they did some recordings. I'm not sure. But the slides already give you enough information to get excited about this.
This week's episode of BSD Now is also brought to you by Tarsnap. Head over to tarsnap.com and check it out.
Yeah, because backups, you always wanted to have backups, and by the time you need them, it's sometimes too late. So you should have definitely snapshots, or not just snapshots, but your data secured in the cloud. But how do you do that? Well, you should definitely take a look at Tarsnap, because Tarsnap will encrypt it first while it's still on your local hard disk, and after it's been encrypted, and only after then, it will upload it to the cloud, so the cloud will never see unencrypted data, and other people who might be able to steal that, they only get the encrypted part and don't understand what it's all about. And you're the only person, as the user, keeping the decryption keys, will be able to access those and get the files back in case you need them. So when disaster strikes, your files are somewhere in the cloud, but other cloud users or cloud administrators can't get to the file unless they have the decryption key, but that resides.
Otherwise, it's just a bunch of random noise as far as they can tell.
Yeah. And the author, Colin Percival, who also presented at AsiaBSDcon, worked out a Tarsnap system, and he's keeping that running and making it better and better. So a lot of people can make sure that your backups are secured in the cloud, and it uses various operating system clients, so you have no excuse of saying, well, I would use Tarsnap, but it's not available on my operating system. No, it's available for a bunch of systems, the Linuxes, the BSDs, macOS 10, and Windows subsystem for Linux. And you can also get the source code in a platform-neutral way, so you can compile it yourself if necessary.
Yep. Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
On to the questions.
Yeah. So the first one is from Morgan. He has a ZFS installation question, and it starts with, hi guys, I'm in the process of setting up a FreeBSD file server. The system is 5 years old and has an incomplete UEFI implementation that FreeBSD doesn't like, so he's stuck with an MBR install.
Actually, you might try one of the other options in the installer, specifically either the Lenovo fix, which might also fix things other than Lenovo's, and GPT Active. Those are both workarounds to the incompetent EFI implementations. If neither of those does work, then the MBR is a thing, I guess.
Okay. And he also noticed that the installer creates a separate boot pool when performing a root on ZFS MBR install, which breaks boot environments which he'd really like to use. What is the reason for having a separate boot pool? Is there any reason he couldn't do a manual root on ZFS install to a single pool?
The reason the installer does it that way is to make sure that the main ZFS pool is at the end of the disk, so it can be grown, like in a VM, or if you change disks or whatever, and you want to be able to grow the disk. And the fact that the boot bits for MBR only support booting off the very first partition. So that's why it's end up split with the swap in the middle like that. But if you're willing to not do that, then yes, you can create a single disk MBR.
That will work also, yeah.
But I would recommend trying the 2 GPT workarounds first and see if you can get those working instead.
Yeah, okay, so thanks for sending us those questions. Next up is Andre, splitting ZFS arrays or not. So he writes, hi guys, thank you for the great show. I started listening after I chose FreeNAS over Synology for his home NAS and server and looked around if there were any podcasts on BSD, and luckily you found us. So he has several questions, but will refrain from bombarding us in one mail and split the questions over several episodes. Oh, excellent.
Perfect.
Okay, it starts with, at the moment, he runs a 5-disk ZFS Z1 with a 1 SATA port free for drive replacement. He started with 2 terabyte drives and expanded it to 4 terabyte drives about 2 years ago. And now he got a new space warning, or free space warning, that should be 80% full. Upgrading to 6 or 10 terabyte drives will cost a small fortune. Boy, he's wondering if he should use 2 3-disk Z1 arrays. And he worries about data safety because of the striping of the arrays, and he don't need the added speed. Of course, he knows he cannot migrate the data directly and will migrate it through another drive.
So 2 things there. So when you do the 2 separate VDEVs, while the data is striped across it, each one is still a RAID Z1. So as long as you don't lose 2 disks in any one of the arrays, you're okay. So striping across 2 RAID Z1s is just as risky as having 1 big RAID Z1. Either way, losing 2 disks loses everything. Although, actually with the 2 separate RAID Z1s, you could lose 1 disk from each and still be okay. But if you lose 2 disks from any one of the 2, you'll lose all your data, but you would have done that with your 5 or 6 disk RAID Z1 anyway. So splitting it would allow you to upgrade just 3 of the disks at once instead of 5, and that might give you that little bit more flexibility. And then, yeah, your other option is hopefully by middle to 3/4 of the way this year, we'll have the RAID Z expansion code in FreeBSD, which will allow you to grow your 5-disk RAID Z1 into a 6-disk RAID Z1. Adding 1 more drive and getting a bunch more free space. But if you're already at 80% full, maybe you can't wait that long. I know your pain. What I had to do was add an extra storage controller card to my chassis and then a separate shelf that holds just disks as a separate chassis because I had used up all the space on the 36 disks built into the chassis and had to add 44 more disks.
Yeah, well, ZFS comes at a price, especially if you store a lot of data. But
well, it's not really a price. It's like the storage is what costs the money. It's ZFS's fault that you need bigger hard drives.
No. It's I should have. But what I like is that
you have both approaches. You can upgrade a couple disks at a time, or if you have the space somehow, then you add more disks instead. If there's room in your chassis, you can buy something like an LSI controller card. You can get those. They range between $100 and $300. But if you're going to be spending $1,000 on disks, then $100 on a controller is not so bad. But it depends if you have room in your chassis. I think the chassis my home NAS is in, it can hold up to 14 drives, I think, total. And so I expanded it from 6 disks to 12. But that might not be an option for you.
Yep. What I like is that
so splitting across the 2 3-disk RAID Z1s will let you upgrade 3 disks at a time, which might be better. Sometimes for home users, if you're going to grow it over time, I even recommend doing mirrors. While you do have the limits of, it's costing more for the storage because you're having that level of redundancy, it does mean that you can upgrade doing 2 disks at a time in the future. And you can do that. It really depends on your chassis and a bunch of other considerations. So,
yeah. I like that he's aware of that, so that it's 80% full, which is the typical, be careful with copy on writes being slow at a
right. 80% is not so much a hard deadline anymore, but you definitely want to consider what you're going to be doing for adding space once you get to that point, for sure.
Okay. Next up is Jake with a single line question even. He writes, only Alan mentioned that he was doing some stuff in C that he should probably be doing in Python. Like what?
I didn't say that.
That's during one of the interview questions that we did with ourselves, probably.
I don't know that I ever said I should be doing anything in Python, because I've
don't remember
learned Python, but
oh, maybe it was out of context.
I don't recall what's being referred to there. I don't know.
Well, okay.
I think it was maybe string processing is just nasty in C, and maybe any other language would be good for that. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, I don't.
More leaning towards learning Rust or Go rather than Python, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we hear at conferences that people are using it quite heavily for different things. So yeah, maybe if we have a bunch more time, then we look at those languages. But for now, it's just shell and C, I guess. Okay. Dave is next with a screen sharing and video conference question. Yeah, so he writes, I know who that is. Hi, folks. Thanks so much for the time you all spent cooking up BSD Now, especially the Christmas sessions. So amazed. Yeah, okay. Sorry couldn't make it to FOSDEM, so thank you in person. Any suggestions on sharing X windows from FreeBSD to a remote colleagues using OS 10? So he writes, there are plenty of options to do the other way using WebRTC and friends, but unfortunately he needs to share his end. He's not a bunch, or we've got a bunch of options on sharing TMUX sessions, but it's not really sufficient. We seem often to want to share a browser session or X Windows session too.
Well, you can do VNC or something to do X Windows. Like you can set up a read-only VNC so they can see but can't move your mouse cursor. Other options, I've used OBS, Open Broadcaster Studio, to stream from a desktop, but I don't think that's really what you're talking about. I think even the WebRTC stuff on FreeBSD mostly only does the webcam, not necessarily the desktop. I'm not sure.
It's, yeah, the direction is difficult because you can certainly run like an XRDP server on your machine,
or I think
other
VNC
people
maybe makes sense. But
yeah, but other people seeing the same screen while you're like moving your mouse around or demoing something, that's difficult because typically these like XRDP would multiplex your desktop, so each user that logs in will get his own personal or her own personal desktop without seeing what the other people are using.
So VNC would give them your screen, but you'd want to make it read-only so that they can't move your mouse, because that would get really frustrating, even if they weren't doing it on purpose. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe people who watch the show have other ideas. I've just never needed to do that, so never spent much time looking into it.
Yeah, other than screen recording, and but people want to sometimes, let's meet on the terminal server, for example, and then demo something, and then people can, let me take the mouse for something. There are certain ways, but the combination with OS 10 and FreeBSD makes it a bit more difficult. So yeah, send us something if you have an idea or using that already, then we can share that with the rest. Yeah. And yeah, that would interest me directly because I sometimes have the same problem. Okay, last but not least is James with a Zfs Disk Id Switching question. That's a bit longer. So he writes, hey guys, love the show. I've learned so much listening to you that I have switched to ZFS as his root for an existing Ubuntu server. Oh, excellent. Everything has been great, and he rests easier knowing that his data is secure and has been working great for many years now. As happens to us all, he's running low on space, and some of the drives have almost 8 years of on time. So I'm trying to replace the old drives with larger ones by swapping them out one at a time. He has 4 drives and 2 mirrored VDEVs, and the issue he's having is that his motherboard only has 4 SATA connectors. He knows that he could just remove a disk and have it resilver from the other mirror, but then could be leaving him open to data loss during that time because if that other disk dies. Yeah. So he gets a SATA riser that has a USB hard disk dock on hand and thought he could temporarily use that to sync the drives. Everywhere he reads says that you are to add disks to your pool by ID, which is how all the existing drives are labeled. However, when he looks at the ID at the new drive of the dock, it prepends USB to the ID due to the interface. None of the other disks have the USB label. So his question is, can he replace the disk and have ZFS recognize the disk after he connects it directly to the SATA interface? If it won't just work, what would he need to do to ZFS to find the drive again? He has read that you can export and import a pool again and force the by IDs label. Would that work for the label change? Sorry about the long-winded email for a relatively basic question. Yeah, we understand what the problem is.
So ZFS writes its own labels on the disk, 2 at the beginning and 2 at the end of the disk, so that it can always identify the disk no matter how the device name or by ID stuff changes. So the answer is yes, that will work. So you'll attach the USB disk and do zpool replace pool name, old disk, new disk, with old disk and new disk being the device names or by IDs, and it will copy all the data. Once it's done, it'll remove the disk you replaced, and you will then be able to swap the removed disk out of the chassis and put the USB disk in. If it doesn't detect it right away, usually zpool online pool name and the new by ID, and then it will look at the device, see the new ID, and update the pool to include where the disk is moved to. It's one of the advantages of ZFS. If you have a machine with hot swap bays, you can shut it down or whatever and shuffle the disk any way you want and boot it up again, and it will just figure out where everything is and make it work.
Yeah, your zpool status output would then say was dev whatever in one.
Well, that's when it's missing.
Yeah.
Once it's got the new location, it won't do that. But anyway, it should just work. And if it doesn't, the most you'll have to do is a zpool online, the pool name and the new ID, and it will figure out what's where and update everything, and it'll be magic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, that's nice that ZFS keeps those. Yep.
Yeah, so ZFS gives each disk a globally unique ID so that it can always tell what's where and knows what's up. And it will even deal with resilvering any data that gets written between when you disconnect the USB device and when you plug it into the SATA slot. Although you can do that with the system powered off as well.
Yep. You can also try it out first with the -N option to see how it would look like in case you attach it to the wrong.
Any of the commands that involve doing stuff to the pool support the -N option, which is no op. It won't do it, but it'll show you what zpool status would have said if you had done it.
Mm.
So it's how you can make sure that it lays things out the way you expect.
Sure. Okay, that's the feedback and questions section for this week, which conclude also our BSD Now episodes. Thank you for watching, and again, send us questions, comments, anything that you found on the internet, show ideas, topics, or any stories, like blog posts that you found. Send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future episode.